So what we're going to do today is to look at the history of a place on the map of the world that's either called Israel, some people call it that, other people call it Palestine. The point I'm going to get to here is that there's a lot of self-proclaimed researchers or truthers who have made some kind of monumental screw-ups. Basically, their understanding of the history of this part of the world is just not there, and these people, again, because they don't know their history, they're liable to be useful idiots. And so as a result of that, there's an awful lot of problems that are being created in the world today as a direct consequence of just ignorance of basic history. So what I've decided to do is to construct like a timeline, basically, in hundreds of years. So this horizontal line here signifies an important date. You could call it a year zero. It's basically, for those people that sort of try to claim that Jesus never existed, well, this is a bit of a problem for you, because our whole calendar is based on AD, Anno Domini, after the birth of Christ and before Christ. So let's talk about this country and what happened when. And then I'll also talk about some kind of like really, really obvious misconceptions. So again, something that lots of people get confused about is that they confuse countries with governments. So an important date, I think, would be, let's put it here, 1917. So that's when the Balfour Declaration was made. So that was the first time that in modern times that a government of Israel was suggested. But the thing, again, what I find with a lot of these kind of researchers who actually don't do any research, and I've heard this mentioned in loads and loads of podcasts, is that they actually get this confused, and they sort of seem to think that the Balfour Declaration happened after the end of the Second World War, after the Holocaust, which obviously is wrong. It happened in 1917, towards the end of the First World War. That said, it took until, well, I suppose we could put it here, 1948, until there was an actual government in modern times of Israel, yeah? So you can see here in the whole timeline, it's highly congested, really, in terms of modern times. You had the Balfour Declaration. In 1948, Israel became an independent state. And I don't know, again, most normie truthers or researchers who don't do any research, they probably don't know that there was a war, that the Arab countries surrounding Israel didn't want an independent Israeli state with a government, and they attacked Israel at that point, or attacked the Israeli government. Again, it is really congested here, but in 1968, there was a 6-day war where, again, Arab governments attacked the government of Israel. And then in 1972, same thing happened. This time it was the Yom Kippur War. So again, Israel was attacked by Arab governments. This is all sort of fairly recently. We're here now in 2024. So what I find quite interesting is that there's a lot of people who think that this land should really be under the governance of another group of people, people who follow Islam. Most people will call these people, normies will call them Palestinians. For me, I just call them human beings. But human beings who are still deluded in that they follow the idea of government, which is in clear breach of natural law, as I've explained numerous times. Now, again, I think most researchers who don't do any research, they kind of imagine that Islam is a very old religion. And in the scale of things, that's not true. The Prophet Muhammad was born in the early 7th century. So yeah, it was 610 AD. So very early on in the 7th century. So my question to kind of these normie non-researchers is, before that there were no Muslims living in this part of the world. There were no Palestinian, what you would now call Palestinian Arabs who follow the religion of Islam. And the reason for that is that Islam didn't exist before 610 AD. So what did exist before 610 AD? One thing that did exist was, in Israel, what we now call Israel, is part of the map called Israel, was Christianity. So Christianity kind of began around here, didn't it? We know when, because it's kind of marked into our calendar. So you can argue that the origins of Christianity began here, over 600 years before Islam began as a religion. So what about Judaism? When did that start? How long have Jews been living in Israel for? Well, we know that there were Jewish people living in this part of the world at the same time that Jesus was around. Jesus interacted with a lot of Jewish religious leaders at the time he was alive. If you go to Jerusalem today and you go to this place called the Wailing Wall, that's the remnants of the second Jewish temple. And this is all being carbon dated and everything. So that was built 600 years before Christ. So let's mark this on the timeline. So 600 years before Christ, we had the second temple. So we know that there were obviously Jewish people who followed Judaism, living in this part of the world, on a dot on the map, 600 years before the birth of Jesus. So in total, that would be 1,200 years before the Prophet Muhammad was born. But it goes back even further than that. On that site, they call it Temple Mount. Temple, has that got anything to do with these temples that the Jews built? Yeah, of course it has. If you go there today, this is where the modern Dome of the Rock is. And there's also a mosque next door to that. And that's been built on top of these temples that the Jews previously built. So there was a first temple that was built in the 10th century before Christ. So let's mark this on the timeline. So 10th century, so we got the first temple. So again, this is proving that Jews have been living in this part of the world for a very, very long time. So at that time, this kind of region was called Israel and Judea. So the point that these kind of researchers who don't do any research, they kind of fail to, they don't understand. There was no Muslim Palestinians living in this part of the world for thousands of years. So, you had Saul, Jewish kings, David, Solomon, all massively predating the arrival of Islam to this part of the world. And please don't attach any value judgments to this. This is just facts. It's not that I prefer Judaism over Islam. I'm just pointing out some facts here. If you ask a Muslim when the Prophet Muhammad was born, was he born here? Somewhere here? Or was he born in the early 7th century? They'll tell you what the answer is. Again, I'm making no value judgments here as well, but in now when was this? In the year 638 AD, followers of Islam, let's get this right there, they conquered Jerusalem. So I'll just put CJ because it's difficult for me to write all of this out because I'm holding the camera with one hand. So that's when Jerusalem first became under control, under Arab rule. So I guess you could say for a while here, it would be I guess like what say people living in Gaza might want. You know, this part of the map being under Islamic kind of an Islamic theology, like Islamic rule. So that actually went on for quite a long time. So you can see this now in not just in Jerusalem, but in many other parts of the world. Like I was on Kos recently, and you can see there was quite a big expansionary period. The kind of Islamic world invaded and built mosques all over the place. So then in the 11th century, so about towards the 1095, that's the acknowledged date, something big happened, which is the start of the Crusades. So for all of this period, the place on the map that's currently called Israel was under Muslim control. So the Crusades began, so that was a bunch of people who nominally were following Christ, but they certainly weren't following his teachings, set off to what they called the Holy Lands with the intention of forcing the Arabs out of places like Jerusalem. And that went on till 1291. That was the end of the Crusade period. So there was like a lot of bloodshed going on there. So, people who were notionally followers of Christ, people who were notionally followers of Islam, they kind of murdered each other. Pieces of ground were passed from one side to another repeatedly. Lots of bloodshed. We then had, a period of Ottoman rule under the Turkish Empire. But it's important to realise that there were still Jews living in Israel, this place in the map called Israel, throughout that period. I think the point that I'm trying to get at here is that I think there's a lot of researchers who don't do any research, labouring under a misapprehension that, that do they know that this modern state of Israel was established in 1948? I don't know. Maybe they do. Maybe they do. But the impression that I get is that most of them, they kind of believed that there were no Jews living in this place on the world map called Israel prior to that. That they were all boated in from Eastern Europe. That the entire Jewish population of this place on the map called Israel didn't exist before 1948. There were no Jews living in what's called Israel prior to 1948, and they all came over from Europe following the end of World War II. That's just not true. Some did, but most of them were already there. They were there for thousands of years. Looking at the timeline here, there were no Muslims living in this place on the map called Israel prior to the year 610 AD. And the simple reason for that is there were no Muslims before that, because Islam is a relatively new religion compared to Christianity, compared to Judaism. Again, I'm not making any judgments at all. These are just historical facts. So does this make me a Zionist, right? So again, many of these researchers who don't do any research, they can't even say Zionist properly. Zionist, I've heard one of them say. which basically just shows you how little that they know, right? So for those that just throw these words around, these repeater stations who just throw these words around without even knowing what they mean, what does it mean to be a Zionist? Well, a Zionist is somebody who believes that there should be a government established in this place on the map that's called Israel or Palestine, whatever you want to call it, and that government should be there to rule that part of the world. Now, for me, that government should be Jewish. Now, it should be a theology. Now, for me, I don't believe that. I don't believe in the whole idea of government. I'm a libertarian. So I believe that the concept of government is wrong because it's in breach of natural law. So please don't write that I'm a Zionist, because how can somebody who doesn't believe in government, how can you say that they're a Zionist? It's just like stupid, right? So what's the point of this video? The point of this video is to try to educate some researchers who don't do any research and inform these people that Jews have been living in this part of the world that's currently called Israel for thousands of years. And then this sort of thing of, like land being owned by people, stolen from, the Jews have stolen Arab land. For me, this again, it betrays this kind of collectivist mindset, this mindset that believes in government. For me as a person, I don't believe in governments. I don't believe that governments should control particular parts of the map. This is where tyranny comes from. This is our main obstacle that's stopping us from experiencing true freedom. So that's all I want to say today, so God bless.